Hello, I'm Andy Last. I run MullenLowe Salt. We've rather grandly called this the irresistible rise of environmental, social and governance. And essentially what we do for these businesses is help them with sustainability. So how they move the sustainability agenda from managing risk to finding growth in environmental issues. Why are sustainability and purpose talking to people's hearts and minds so much at the moment? And I think that's as a result of two things. There are two huge megatrends that overlay everything that's going on at the moment. One is that you have a generation growing up now for whom climate change and everything that's going on are not up for question. This is what they're growing up with. They're growing up with an understanding of it, with visibility of everything that's going on, and an innate understanding of the pressing need for sustainability in all aspects of their life, including in business. Coupled with that, of course, you have the connectivity of the digital age that enables everybody to see the behaviours of companies. Companies can no longer hide what they're doing. There's forced transparency. At the same time, you have what we talk about, the personal brand curation people now have on social media. They're portraying an image of themselves. They're managing that brand, and part of the way they do that is by the company they keep in, the products they choose, the causes they support, and where they work. And that all coming together has transformed how people choose what to buy and where to work, and move, I believe, from ESG as risk mitigation towards growth opportunity. Your stakeholders are asking about it. Whatever part of the investment world you're in, your investors are increasingly asking you to report on ESG and to take it into consideration. There are other stakeholders you need to report to. Your portfolio companies, you're working at how you can assess what they're doing, measure what they're doing, and encourage them to get better. And the principles for responsible investment and these sorts of ways of signing up to certain pledges. Which leads to this question, how you balance purpose and profit. For others, it's around employee engagement. We need to engage in this space because we need to attract talent and retain talent, and this is a key way of doing that. You see that the LinkedIn stat is fascinating in that. So I have a long love affair with Unilever. I love them as an organisation, but they're not the sexiest company in the world. You work for Unilever, you're selling margarine and toilet bleach and things like that. And yet, for 3 years running, they were in the top 3 most in-demand companies to work for in LinkedIn, alongside Google and Apple. So actually, their commitment to sustainability and a social purpose enabled them to get the best talent into the business and to retain it. And again, we've done a lot of work with companies like Rolls-Royce, for whom that is the main driver. Rolls-Royce's big issue is getting engineering talent to go and work in Crewe and Derby rather than Silicon Valley. So therefore, them understanding and talking about their social purpose more is a way of doing that. Third one around marketing cut-through. As I say, we work with a number of consumer goods companies, and for them, you go back sort of 30 years, and all they had to do was spend their media budget buying the ads in the middle of Coronation Street, and they would reach everyone they wanted to reach. That world has changed. We're all avoiding ads. We're all consuming media in many different ways. There's so many different channels that actually they need to find a way of cutting through on this. This is just one example. Lipton tea. So Unilever is the world's biggest producer of black tea. Lipton is their biggest brand. They have a major issue in that young people are seeing as increasingly irrelevant to them. This brand, it's an old person's brand, and I want coffee rather than tea. So having a social purpose there, they have sustainably sourced tea there. The Rainforest Alliance certify what they're producing in Kericho, again in Kenya. So we went to Kenya to understand that, bring that purpose to the fore, and created a series of films of how the fact that it was sustainably sourced tea was enabling people working in those plantations to fulfill other elements of the career, and young people in particular. So there was entrepreneurs, there was rappers, there were marathon runners, a whole series of them who were able to make films talking about what Lipton had enabled them to do. And those were films that talked directly to this younger consumer audience in countries like the US and the UK. So the central thought of sustainability and purpose gave them marketing cut-through, and the films we created for them had the highest cut-through Unilever had ever seen on their mobile platforms. In terms of ESG, it needs to be what is most relevant to you, both to do actively and to stop doing. So then that's highly important. Again, there isn't a one-size-fits-all on ESG. And then we take that thought through into the work we do with our customers, but again, I think it's highly relevant here, is to help them distinguish between their swords and their shields. You need a sword and a shield if you're going into battle, but some of them you go on the offensive with, some of them are there to protect you. And again, I think there's a direct analogy there between the things that you do for risk mitigation, which I think a lot of the ESG decision-making is being made in investment at the moment, and what you do to create value. So I think that swords and shields exercise, which is a very simple exercise, is a very valuable one to do. Third one, something we see in our industry a lot is, I don't know if you know, the Cannes Advertising Festival is this big hoo-ha in the south of France each year where the advertising industry pats itself on the back. And the last few years, in the run-up to that, you have these ludicrous campaigns about, sort of tear-jerking campaigns about saving the world, which have nothing behind them, very often no media spend behind them. So again, looking underneath the surface to check there is substance in what companies say they're doing. And how do you tell if a company is doing it for real, either turning the lens on yourself or to the companies you're investing in? We use the Ascend model, which is talked about more fully in the book, which is to say, does what they're doing align to the core corporate mission? Is there a strong link to what they do as a business? Is that commercial interest crystal clear, the same commercial interest in selling more bars of soap, for example? Does it encourage other people to join in? Because if it does encourage other people to join in, that is an indicator that it is something of genuine social importance. Is there a narrative around that you can tell your core brand story, use to tell your core brand story? And does it drive engagement inside your organization? And I think it's centered around this question of how you move from ESG as risk mitigation to value creation. Again, these are sort of typical criteria from the private equity world. But these are the things private equity firms say, there's research saying these are the things we typically look for when we're investing in a portfolio company in order to assess where they are on ESG. What I think becomes very interesting is when you overlay those four business drivers, because if you look at all of these, they're all sitting in the license to operate space. They are all about risk mitigation primarily. Some of them begin to touch on employee engagement, but frankly, even diversity and compensation are probably core sort of license to operate issues even more than employee engagement. What none of them are doing, though, is looking at how ESG in those companies might be driving its marketing or its sales. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. So by way of example, again, looking at those growth drivers, yes, we work with a lot of companies in the license to operate space. So Axe or Lynx in this country, we did a lot of work to reduce toxic masculinity for them, which meant that they were, if you remember the old Lynx ads around spray more, get more, that they were able to sort of reposition the brand with some genuine positive work around the future of masculinity. And we got in before the Me Too thing happened, so the brand didn't collapse overnight. Mondelez, we do a lot of work with their cocoa supply chains to make sure they still have a license to grow, produce, and market chocolate. Syngenta I've talked about. Again, on the employee engagement side, Lixil is a really interesting company, Japanese conglomerate, huge, the world's biggest toilet manufacturer and sanitation ware. It's gone around buying at Grohe in Germany and American Standard in the States. But this very disparate group of companies, so we use their social purpose and again big programs around sanitation to engage their workforce and unite them. But those are kind of in the bottom end. I think the areas where there is opportunities in ESG around these growth driving areas. So just on the sales side, how you use a purpose or sustainability to drive sales. Andrex I've talked about. Lifebuoy we've talked about. So Andrex gives the social purpose gives a consumer-facing brand prominence. Lifebuoy is an example of how brands can go to the bottom of the pyramid by addressing social purpose and tap into new consumers. Lifebuoy is now the biggest health soap brand in the world, and more people in India know the Lifebuoy jingle than the Indian national anthem. So it is It's an iconic brand that has grown by tackling the needs of the people at the bottom of the pyramid. Givaudan, very interesting in terms of sales. So Givaudan is one of the world's biggest fragrance and flavors businesses. They supply fragrances and flavors to Procter & Gamble and McDonald's and Coca-Cola. And they have found that in their business-to-business tendering, in their ability to pitch for this work, increasingly their sustainability capability is called into question. It's said this is a key criteria whether you're going to win this business or not. Are you up to the level we want to get to on sustainability? So it becomes, in business-to-business sales, it's becoming an increasingly important factor. And then on the marketing side, again, brands like Cadbury, loved brands like Cadbury, are able to start using what they're doing in their supply chains and their social engagement around people who are cocoa farmers in West Africa and other parts of the world, how they can use that to get marketing cut through in the same way that Lipton did. Ben & Jerry's I've talked about. Clear is a really interesting example of this. So Clear is one of the world's biggest shampoo brands. It's huge across Asia and Latin America. They're in danger of becoming commoditized. If they're just competing on product quality, functionality and price, it becomes difficult to maintain that brand premium. So we've helped them create a social mission, as we call it, around tackling the anxiety crisis, and the anxiety crisis in particular as it manifests in China, their biggest market, and encouraging people in that collectivist society where there is a culture that says you shouldn't talk about your individual issues, you need to be part of the collective and part of the crowd. Actually talking about anxiety is a really difficult thing. So having a brand that's known and loved by everyone, has celebrities talking about it, saying it is okay to have anxiety and here are some tools you can use, again, is a brilliant way of that brand getting marketing cut through and maintaining a brand premium. So in terms of trying to answer these core questions, why does ESG matter? Well, I believe it matters because it can drive growth in the business as long as you're specific about what the growth that is you're looking to see, but make sure it's growth rather than just risk mitigation. Your shield is important, but look for the sword. How can you tell if a company is genuinely strong on it? I think the Ascend model is a useful rule of thumb to use when you look at a company. Which really matter in terms of your business? Again, building on that research from the London Business School, which are the material criteria you need to be looking at? The swords and shields exercise is a very simple one, and one I think we can apply to any business. And then there's a process to make sure that ESG and that sort of thinking goes to the heart of the business. The thing is, none of this is that new. I started off in sort of Port Sunlight in this business has always had a connection to society. I think we've probably forgotten it over the last 30 years, certainly up to the financial crash when we became beholden to the algorithms that were driving certain decisions. And you go back to Adam Smith, and Friedman and others said, what he was saying made it very clear that the only thing you should expect from business is it wants to make money for itself. And the most famous quote from Adam Smith, that it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their own regard to their own interest. This sort of was taken to mean businesses have to be self-interested, focused entirely on making money, and nothing else matters, and we should leave them alone to do that. The reality of Smith, though, in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he wrote 17 years before The Wealth of Nations, and came back to when he was on his deathbed because he wanted to make final amendments to the Theory of Moral Sentiments because he believed it was his most important work. The argument in there is that a society can't flourish and be happy where the vast majority of people are poor and miserable. He understood the connection between society and business. And I think that's frankly what we're seeing. Again, starting to look forward, some of the trends we're seeing now. The first one on the marketing side is we have typically, since 2006, focused on the social issues because those are the ones that were best able to drive growth. We're seeing, certainly over the last 12 to 18 months, environmental issues coming right to the fore. And in the consumer goods industry, plastics has become public enemy number one, and how do brands go about that? And they simply are not being allowed by particularly younger consumer base not to talk about the environment, which is a more tricky thing to talk about, but we're beginning to do that across. We're doing that right across the consumer goods industry, and we're seeing it move towards much more campaigning on environmental issues. The second one is on the sales side, so certainly threats from delisting. The impact Walmart is having as a policymaker almost in the States is extraordinary. There's some fascinating things. The gun question in the States, which has been, there's been an impasse at policy level. Regulators aren't going to change the gun laws there. But Walmart is seriously looking at one of the most recent shootings was in Walmart. The ability of those retailers, those big retailers and business to affect social change is fascinating. We're doing a lot of work with the disposable razor industry at the moment, and that was a product they've always been able to say, no, you can't recycle because it's a bit of plastic and there's metal and there's no facilities for doing it. And people would kind of sort of nod, and the retailers would sort of shrug and say, okay, and that is no longer the case. They're absolutely being told, you sort this out, otherwise we're delisting you. So, and then this license to operate, the license to operate of a business that was typically managed by government and regulators, increasingly managed by the public voice, fueled by the internet, the ability to mobilize campaigns, that this license to operate any business has is increasingly a social license to operate, determined by democratic forces, if you can call them that. I'm not sure they are, but it's certainly beyond, it's in the public now. And then, as a final thought, how do you think about landing ESG within your organization? And this is based on how we've seen and helped businesses land sustainability and purpose within theirs. The first one is around clear leadership, sort of leadership Larry Fink is taking, but Paul Polman at Unilever was very clear in his leadership that this was the direction the company was going in. Saying we were talking about this before. The second one is to have a champion in your business. And for those of you who don't support Liverpool, that's what the European Cup looks like. Back in its proper ownership, but to have a champion inside the business. And it is important to have a champion inside the business, but that can't be siloed. Simply appointing someone to champion ESG cannot mean everyone else in the business thinks, oh, brilliant, that's ticked. Because we certainly saw that within the businesses, that someone be appointed to be head of sustainability and everyone else took the day off, and that can't happen. The fourth thing is to educate the business. This is me educating Paul Polman by forcing him to read my book. That's not really, sorry. But there's an education component to this, because people, if they don't understand something, they fear stuff and walk away from it. It's sort of a natural human instinct. So there is an education role to help people feel confident about what's going on. The fifth one is to understand the culture and behaviour change, the culture of an organisation and the behaviour change that needs to happen within that, and the sort of behaviour change models that we use to change hand-washing behaviours, of which that sign in the loo is a very bad example, but there are standard models that we use to help change culture inside organisations, one of which is ADCAR, so how you drive awareness of the issue, desire for it, knowledge of it, the ability, give people the ability to act, and then R is reinforce. I'm turning to our culture change expert on that. But reinforce and actually understand that process, how that process plays out in your organisation. And again, we've had a lot of success driving that sort of culture change within all sorts of organisations. And finally, and to make the point, it is business. I don't think, in all the years I've been talking about this, I don't think I've ever made the case that businesses should engage in purpose or sustainability because it's the right thing to do or because it's morally right. This is business, and not to be afraid, as those corporate comms people were back in 2006, of saying it's business. I think it's important that we all say it's business and don't say, we need to be cognizant and factor in ESG criteria because it's a good thing to do. It's good business.